Welcome. Good to see you all. My name is Andrew Beckman, and we're here. The sponsor of this session tonight is the Association of Pittsburgh Priests, a diocesan-wide organization of ordained and non-ordained women and men who act on our baptismal call to be priests and prophets. Our mission, rooted in the gospel and the spirit of the Second Vatican Council, is to carry out a ministry of justice and renewal in ourselves, the church, and the world. Our topic tonight is the Synod's last lap. You can see it on the screen, looking ahead to October and beyond. And our speaker is Kristen Colberg, Associate Professor of Theology at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota.
I'm excited to be with you for a couple reasons. I love talking about the Synod. As Jim said, I was appointed to be one of the 25 members of the Theological Commission that supports the Synod. It was kind of the honor and shock and joy of my life. And I promised Cardinal Grech, who's the head of the Secretary of the Synod, that not only would I work on that commission, but I would try to be an ambassador in the United States of the Synod. So I take that role very seriously. And the fact that groups like yours are leavens in the world for making synodality a reality, it makes it a real joy for me to speak with you. Another reason I'm glad to speak with you is because we are looking forward to October. And you guys, to be honest, are the first group um, that the summer, there's not a lot going on synodality. I talked to the Leadership Conference of Women Religious in May. But your group really made me think about what's going on with the Synod. So I really had to think for this presentation, and I called a bunch of people around the world and said, hey, I'm talking to the Pittsburgh Priest Group tonight. Tell me some insider tidbits so that I can share it with them. Not sure. One thing I'll say before we get started is that I'm a planner. Okay. My husband is not a planner. I'm a planner. And so I like to know 3 steps in advance. That makes me very comfortable. My experience of the Synod is that it's a joyful, spirit led, professional, dynamic, collaborative process, but it's not always planned 6 steps ahead. So we'll talk about what we're envisioning for October, but it's not the same as like walking through the 10 bullet points of what is going to be achieved. One more prefatory comment. I'm assuming that many of you watched the presentation that I did. It was last September, so I tried not to repeat that. So if there's gaps in what I'm presenting because I'm not trying to overlap what I've already done, certainly in the question and answers we could go back and discuss some points. All right, so now I'm going to share my screen because everybody knows I am a person who likes to do things with images. Okay. So I can't remember when we decided on doing this presentation, but I kind of like this title, The Last Lap. Not because, as Jim and I already discussed over email, not because the Synod's over in October. I mean, that's going to be one of the main purposes of my presentation, is to underscore that the work of living synodality, I think Paul or someone said it when we were talking before we started, the work of living synodality is really just beginning. So, but it is the last lap of a long 3-year process. So I like this idea of what does the end of this formal process look like? Now, again, you're not like, oh, Kristen, please don't start from the beginning, because that's not, I just want to highlight something. So when we started talking about synodality, we weren't really sure even what this word meant, okay? It's this kind of strange Greek word that was not a part of the church's, parlance, regular conversation. I did a PhD at Notre Dame for 5 years on ecclesiology, and never once did we use the word synodality, okay? But look what we have in the most recent document for the Synod. I think we're getting closer to a definition that's really exciting. It says synodality is a style that starts from listening as the first act of the church. I think that's really a fruit of the last 3 years. Like, we didn't start with this definition, but it's where we're landing as we come to deeper understand what the reality of synodality is. So synodality is a style that starts from listening as the first act of the church. So before we start talking about what's going to happen in October, I want to go back. Okay, this is my idea of a time machine. So this is Back to the Future, one of my personal favorite movies. So I want to look back a little bit before we look ahead. Okay, so looking back, this is a picture from October of 2021. When I arrived for the meeting, there was a 3-day meeting of the Theological Commission before the formal opening of the Synod. So I just got off the plane and I'm so excited to be in St. Peter's Square. This is the first time I ever saw Pope Francis in person. I'm taking a picture from the seats. You can see, I think Cardinal Tagle might be sitting in front. But the reason I included this picture is because I wanted to include this picture. This is some of the members of the Theological Commission hearing Pope Francis address us, 3 days before the formal Mass opening the Synod. And the reason I want to show you this picture is because remember when the Synod started, it was COVID, okay? So like when we're thinking back about the beginning of this, none of us even knew if we could go to Rome. The Vatican brought 3 ambulances outside of the Santa Marta guest house so that we could all take COVID tests so we could fly home afterwards. You could only be in Rome for 96 hours because the Italian government wouldn't let you stay longer. So we started the Synod in COVID times, which I think is significant. Now, this is the original timeline for the Synod, okay? So if you are looking at this document, you'll notice 2 things. One thing that I pointed out, and I might have mentioned last year, is that as soon as we all got to Rome, the bishops who had not seen this timeline yet all thought that this timeline was not reasonable or they couldn't make it work. They thought that starting in October and holding the first round of consultations and being done by April was too fast. So one of the first conversations that I was part of with the Synod was many bishops asking the Pope for more time. And Pope Francis, some other bishops though, said, Holy Father, we just started this very public global process, but we can't change the deadlines and the timeline before we've even started. We'll look like we don't know what we're doing. But what Pope Francis said was that if his brother bishops were telling him they needed more time, synodality is about listening. So one of the first official acts of the Synod was to extend the deadline for the national phase, the local phase, from April till the end of August. So one reason I'm pointing this out to you is because I'm trying to show you that from the beginning, the Synod has been something that is open to changing. It's not set in stone. It tries to be flexible. Now let's look over here at the end of our timeline. We can see that this originally, if we remember, the Synod was supposed to end in October of 2023. Originally, this was going to be a 2-year process. But Pope Francis, about a year into it, decided that that wasn't enough. And so we actually have this extra year, October of 2024, because of the event, of the dynamism of the Synod and its willingness to change and adapt. So I showed you the last time I was with you that most of that first meeting was around these kind of small tables by language groups. And what I told you last time was that usually a Synod looks like this. A synod is normally a kind of a passive event where a few speakers are speaking at the front and everybody else is kind of absorbing or listening to what the speaker has to say. But we all know that the synod in October 2023 looked like this. This is one of the audience halls in the Vatican, which normally looks like this. This room is normally set up like this, and it's a place where Pope Francis does very large gatherings. But they totally reconstructed the room for the synod because of a desire to have this kind of sharing around these tables. So one thing that we've seen in the synod that I just want to underscore is that in my mind, as an ecclesiologist or someone who teaches about the church, this is one view of church. This is a different view of church. Okay? This is one view of authority. This is another view of authority. This is a view of authority that's rooted in baptism. This is a view of authority that's rooted in the dignity, co-responsibility, dynamism, sensus fidelium of all the faithful. So a really major change. Okay, so these are like just a close-up version of one of the smaller tables. Now, I was looking around trying to find a good picture for this slide. So right here, we can see Cynthia Bailey Mans, who is one of the representatives from the United States. She is actually from the Diocese of Minneapolis, a spiritual director and pastoral leader there. But the reason why I actually am showing you this picture is because many times people will say to me, Kristen, what is it like to sit at one of those round tables in the synod? And the answer is, I've never sat at one of those round tables because the theologians are sitting at these tables like on the sides, okay? So Pope Francis, now my team, the team that I'm on is one of the writing teams, so I have not been a dynamic part of this gathering, but the theologians are sitting at these side tables. Now, the reason that I bring that up is because if you're asking me to reflect on what's the future of the synod look like, well, one of the big questions right now is what is the role of the theologians in the synod process? Because up till right now, one of the strengths of the synod has been to let the voices of the people of God speak. And we see that in the document, Enlarge the Space of Your Tent. We see that in many of the things that the synod has put out. But we haven't yet really had a theological reflection on how can we synthesize some of what has been said and give it a theological treatment. So, for example, the document that I was one of the authors on, the Enlarge the Space of Your Tent document, which summarized all of the comments from around the world. It doesn't quote a single pope. It doesn't quote Vatican II. It doesn't quote the Catechism. It's just the voices of the people of God. So one question that I think the Synod is working on right now is what are the role of theologians in this process? So I put this picture up here. These are some of the women theologians and that we were meeting with Pope Francis after we gave him one of the drafts of one of the documents. So maybe, again, some of you are maybe at this webinar because you know a lot about the Synod and you want more. And some of you are maybe at this webinar because you don't know very much about the Synod and you'd like to learn. So one thing that's important is that Pope Francis in the last several months has established 10 working groups, okay? 10 groups that he has, each of these working groups has about 15 theologians working on them. And this is really showing us what were the themes that emerged, what are the themes that Pope Francis feels are workable right now. So for example, one thing that I'm sure mention many times tonight is that if you ask people who are really involved with the Synod, what are some of the major questions that get discussed what are some of the major themes? Every single person, like I could play a game right now, I could call 10 theologians that are involved with the Synod and I could say, what's a big issue on the floor, and I will pay you $10 if 8 of the 10, their first answer is not women. Okay. Everybody at the Synod knows that one of the things that's bubbling up at the Synod is what is the role of women in the church. There is a real sense that the world is ready to talk about this issue. There used to be a perception that women in North America and Europe were interested in talking about the role of women, but that the whole global Catholicism wasn't on that page, and we couldn't go there because we had to kind of wait until everyone was agreed that was what they wanted to work on. But I think that the Synod has really demonstrated that there is kind of unanimity on this topic, and that this is something that we want to move forward on. But there's also a sense that the time for that is not right now. And I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. But I do want to talk about, so here are the topics. So there's a difference, Mike. Here's like what I'm trying to say. There's a difference between what has been brought up at the Synod and what they're actually willing to make action on right now. Okay? So these are the things they are making action on right now. Okay? Let's just look at this list for a minute. I know everybody can read, but it helps us if we linger on it for a second. So, what is the relationship between the Eastern Catholic churches and the Latin Church? I think of one of the greatest critiques that I hear of the Synod, of many, but one is that the Eastern Catholic churches feel that this is really a synod of the Latin Church, that the Eastern churches have not fully, had a voice in the way that they would have liked. Listening to the cry of the poor, mission in a digital environment, guidelines for priestly formation in a synodal key, theological and canonical perspectives on ministry, the relationships between bishops, consecrated life, and ecclesial associations, aspects of the person and the ministry of the bishop, and the nature of the ad limina visits, when all the bishops of a conference go and visit the Pope, like what are they doing there? Like what's the purpose of those visits? The role of the nuncio. Okay, what is the role of the papal nuncio in a particular country? Like what is the most appropriate role for that figure? I think number 9 is super interesting. What are the theological criteria and synodal methodologies of shared discernment of controversial issues? Okay, so what I want you to see in this list, and I think it's something that people find very frustrating right now, and we're going to talk about it more at the end of this presentation, but that what Pope Francis is really signaling to us right now is that this synod is not about solving particular hot button issues. It is about developing structures of decision making for coming to authentic advances on those issues. Okay. So number 9 is telling us that one of the goals is when there's controversial issues, how do we make decisions? Not a list of controversial decisions that we're going to provide an answer on. And then number 10, I also think is really interesting. How does the church receive the fruits of the ecumenical journey and have it transform our practices? So what have we learned from all these ecumenical dialogues, and how can they transform us? Okay, so another thing, if we look back on since the year that we've been together, a really exciting thing that's happened, which, if I had to say one of the things that's happened at the Synod that's the most exciting and the most important, but the least understood, is the fact that the Synod met all the continents met together in gatherings to talk about what each continent needs. Never before in the history of the Catholic Church has the Catholic Church met as continents. Okay? Now, one of the reasons that's so important is because in the Catholic Church, we have a very distinct or developed sense of the Pope, the universal church, what happens in Rome, And we also have a very distinct sense of dioceses, local churches. But the Catholic Church has never had a very robust middle level, regional level. One of the things that Pope Francis wants in the Synod is he wants to decentralize the church. He says in Evangelii Gaudium, the Pope shouldn't be making all the decisions that need to be made in the church's life. That people closer to the problem, closer to the ground, are more equipped oftentimes to make decisions that are pastorally and theologically appropriate. That's very hard to do when you only have the Rome level and the local diocese level. So when Pope Francis is asking the church to meet as continents, it's an effort towards decentralizing the church. Okay, now sorry, I should have warned you. Nobody likes to be reminded of COVID out of the blue, but sometimes I like to say, and this is like a dangerous thing to say, the Synod in certain ways is like COVID. Now, let me say more before I get excommunicated. COVID is what we call a disruptor. Okay. COVID made change happen very fast that would have taken years and years and years to be realized, but it accelerated certain changes because of unique circumstances. So sometimes we could say a smartphone is a disruptor, or some things will disrupt a particular industry. Okay. But before COVID, we wouldn't be talking to each other on Zoom right now. We wouldn't be ordering all our food. My daughter would never believe that I never ordered a meal to my front door when I was her age, okay? Because that's just how COVID changed things. Well, the Synod is also changed. It changed something very fast. It changed this problem of this universal level and the local level, and it started creating this middle level in a very quick, effective way, something that theologians have been talking about for decades and centuries, happened really fast. So one other reason I want to bring this up is that the one continent that did have a lot of experience meeting together is South America, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Okay. So if you're familiar with SALAM, which you don't have to be, but SALAM is the organization of Caribbean and Latin American bishops. They, for the last 50, 60 years, have had a tradition of meeting as a continent. So here's something that's like so exciting to me. Pope Francis asked them, instead of just holding meetings of bishops, to hold assemblies of all lay people and bishops together. Okay. So previously, Latin America had all their bishops would come together in an Episcopal conference. Pope Francis asked them to meet as ecclesial church conference, not just bishops. So my point is, things are changing in the Catholic Church structurally, okay? We're having new levels of authority, new ways of meeting, new ways of decisions being reached. So the Synod is disrupting the Catholic Church and creating new realities very fast. Okay, so I just want to review, just to get us excited for 1 minute. Like, let's think about some of the questions that the last Synod last October talked about, okay? So one of the questions, I mean, these are just 3 of the many. How can we create spaces where those who feel hurt by the church and unwelcome by the community feel recognized, received, free to ask questions, and not judged? I mean, so while some of us have frustration with the Synod, or we think it doesn't move fast enough, or we wish it would do this thing or that thing, let's remember the beauty of this question, that 20 years ago, it would have been unimaginable to think that the Catholic Church was going to have a meeting at the highest possible level, and this was the question we were talking about. Okay, another question. I love this question. Should bishops decide or discern together with or separately from the other members of the people of God, i.e., the laity. Do both options together and separately have a place in a synodal church? I mean, mind exploding right now, okay? Because what we're asking right now is, do all decisions have to be made just by bishops? Or when is it appropriate for decisions to be made by bishops at the universal level working together with the laity? I mean, that is amazing things happening in our church. How can the church of our time better fulfill its mission through a greater recognition and promotion of the baptismal dignity of women? Amazing. I mean, really exciting. Get out of bed, get out of bed in the morning, exciting stuff. Okay, now, something that not many people know, and we kind of were chatting about this before the official Zoom started, actually over Lent this past year, there was another round of listening sessions. There was supposed to be another round of listening sessions in the diocese. Okay, so this is my diocese of St. Cloud. I just made all these slides I made just for you. Okay, these are all new. So we had 2 in-person sessions and 2 virtual sessions, because during this last year of the Synod, we were supposed to do another level of local listening. In my experience, very, very, very few people knew that that happened. Okay, I don't know if all of you were aware of it, but it makes me again wonder about this question we were talking about before the Zoom started of, do people know what's going on with the Synod? Are people kind of have fatigue about the Synod? Has the Synod been, I mean, it's a beauty in some ways that it's gone on for 3 years, but it hasn't been so much that it's kind of gotten lost in the ether. So there was another document, which you can look up online. The United States compiled a synthesis of all this second round of listening. So it's the national synthesis of the people of God in the United States for the interim stage. So you can look at that document if you're interested. It uses this, the framework for this document is that it says that what it heard in these listening sessions is that people want to see the church as a safe harbor and a fiery communion. Those are the phrases it uses. That the United States wants to see the Catholic Church as a safe harbor and a fiery communion. It wants to see synodality lived out in reality. So I just mentioned right here there were three groups on this. One was participation in the church, one was social justice, and one was vocations. And I was a member of the team on the vocations group. So I worked on this document quite a bit. All right, now, if you know the Back to the Future movies, you know that there are 3 of them. And you know that if you're like me, you think the second one was the worst one. And it's when they go into the future. They go actually, instead of going into the past. So now we're going into the future. So let's say all of you, this presentation is only 35 or 40 minutes long. It can't cover everything. So let's say you really wanted to go home and read up on what's going to happen in 2024. I'm going to give you some ideas, but here's where you would go in depth. This document, you could Google it, find it, issued by the Vatican towards October 2024. It's going to tell you some of the themes and some of the methodologies that they plan to use. Obviously, the second document that we would look at is, what we call the instrumentum laboris. That's a technical term. It's like the springboard or the jumping off point for a synodal meeting. So it's the text that all those people at round tables are going to be working out of. It's like a workbook. So the second instrumentum laboris, I highlighted it here. It's called How to Be a Missionary Church. So the first session of October 2023 focused on this question: how does a synodal church describe itself? So what are the characteristics of a synodal church? What does this synodal church do? Okay. What are our major theological priorities or themes? This October 2024, the second is addressing the question of how. How do we do it? That is the main word for October 2024 is how. How do we live this out? Okay, now I don't like to have lots of words on slides. I make fun of my husband all the time because I think he always has too many words, but I do have a few words coming up, okay? So this is what the press release from the Vatican says. It says that the guiding document for the first session covered hot button topics, okay? So October 2023, we talked about hot button issues, women deacons, priestly celibacy, LGBTQ outreach. Now, again, this is not my words on the screen. I cut and pasted this from the Vatican's letter towards 2024. So these are not Kristen Colberg's words. These are the Vatican's description. So the Vatican says, first time around, we covered hot button issues. By contrast, this year's text avoids these subjects while offering concrete proposals for listening and accompaniment ministry, greater lay involvement in parish economics and finances, and more powerful parish councils. So the Vatican, the Secretary for the Synod, is trying to be really clear. It's trying to appropriately set people's expectations. 2024 is not going to come up with a policy on priestly celibacy, on divorce, on women in the church, on LGBTQ plus. Those are not going to be the outcomes of 2024's meeting. Okay, hold on. Okay, here's another quote. Just I'm trying to show you just in other words. So instead of providing answers to the many immediate practical questions raised by Catholics in the last 3 years, the working document, the plan for October 2024, focuses on methods and processes the church must employ to better discern those answers through the participation of all. Okay. So one last slide with words on it. So instead of focusing on convergences, like what did we hear and what did people agree on, it is now necessary that a consensus for how we move forward should be reached. Okay. So, sorry, I did have one more slide with words. So this final phase of the synod is about implementation. It is about making decisions about structures and decision making. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second if I can. So what I'm trying to tell you right now, which I think some people find somewhat frustrating, but what I'm trying to convey to you right now is that Pope Francis and the Synod office believe that longer, more sustainable and real transformation of the church will come if the Synod sets up means of decision making that represent baptismal dignity, that represent the sensus fidelium, if there's more accountability, if there's more transparency. So what the Synod thinks and what Pope Francis thinks is that this is a long game, and we're making changes that will allow all these hot button issues to be addressed in an authentic way. So the focus is not on the issues. The focus is on how do we walk as church in a way that allows us to really come to meaningful teachings on these issues. So for some people some people find that and somewhat dissatisfied. They were kind of hoping that October 2024 was going to be a clear lifting up of some of the changes that people articulated during the earlier stages. But I'm now, of course, exciting. Something could happen along those lines, but the plan that the Vatican is articulating is not that. Okay, so I got a couple more quick slides in my last 5 minutes. Okay. One thing I'm just going to point out, because I wouldn't be like a card carrying synodality person if I didn't mention this. Everyone who's an expert on the synod right now is really saying that the vision for the synod can really be seen in Pope Francis's document Evangelii Gaudium from the earliest days of his papacy. His idea of we need a reform of the church to be missionary. We need a conversion of the church that's pastoral and missionary. That we need a conversion of the papacy and the structures of the church to achieve the church's mission. I love this quote. Sorry to put a lot of words, but this quote I find to be so beautiful. I think it's at the heart of synodality, which is about listening and encounter and accompaniment. This quote from Evangelii Gaudium. When we live out a spirituality of drawing nearer to others and seeking their welfare, our hearts are opened wide to the Lord's greatest and most beautiful gifts. Whenever we encounter another person in love, we learn something new about God. Whenever our eyes are open to acknowledge the other, we grow in the light of faith and the knowledge of God. So what some theologians are saying is that synodality is the effort to take this sentence, this quote, and live it out in every level of the church's life. In individual accompaniment, in local structures, in the Pope's ministry, like that this idea of knowing God through encounter. That's really what's there. Okay, so I'm almost done. Okay, so I'm going to end with 5 things that, again, I don't have the secret documents of the Synod office, but if I were a guessing woman, 5 things I think the Synod 2024 is going to focus on. This one is clear. That a big focus of 2024 is renewing different types of councils at the local level of the church. Okay, so the parish, the deanery, the diocesan council, the eparchial council. Right now in canon law, there is many times where canon law indicates that it would be beneficial to consult the faithful through the use of a council. But unfortunately, that is almost always at the discretion of the bishop. So there is a desire among many at the synod that there should be a mandatory character, that sometimes consulting a parish council or a diocesan council should be mandatory. It should not just be at the discretion of the bishop to gather or convoke people, but that in certain instances where listening is important, it should be mandated. It shouldn't just be like a trite or a meaningless consultation, but a genuine seeking of ideas. And we need a commitment to transparency. Another focus that's really clear, another word that is just threaded all the way through the Synod documents is clericalism, the problem of clericalism. So there will definitely be talk at the Synod in 2024 about forming priests, about seminary formation, about forming bishops. One thing that's really come up in the process of the Synod is priests saying that they don't feel supported by their bishop, that they don't feel a brotherhood with their bishop as their guide or their shepherd. So more formation for bishops and a renewal of seminary formation. Again, a huge thing at the Synod is the importance of canon law. I always thought canon law was kind of dry and boring, but canon law has the power to synodalize the church by doing things like making parish council meetings mandatory. So sometimes people say, and it's true, that reform comes from the grassroots, that real change comes from the voices of the people, and that absolutely happens. But sometimes change comes from the center. So, for example, when Pope Francis called the Synod and he mandated everyone to speak, That's an effort of the center bringing about a dynamic reform. Okay. So canon law, which is a universal law, can really synodalize practices in the church. And there will be a great discussion about reforming canon law in a synodal key. We talked about this a lot already, so I'm not going to talk about it more. But, what power does an Episcopal conference have? What decisions can they make? How binding can these decisions be? When can an Episcopal conference decide something and not need Roman, approval, or it doesn't have to go to Rome? And then 5, we touched on this a little bit. I mean, it is inevitable that the question of women is going to come up, even though it's not necessarily on the script, because every single person at the synod, this is bubbling up. And I think it's a topic that is, some bishops in some parts of the world, it is a scary topic to them because we don't know how to handle this issue. We don't know, we're not in agreement on what the next steps would look like. But even though this issue is being specific, sometimes when you say don't think about the pink elephant in the room, all you can think about is the pink elephant in the room. The Vatican is like saying we're not going to make decisions about women right now because we're doing something else. But no matter, the fact that people keep saying that is a reflection of the fact that so many people want to talk about it, and it's going to be hard to not be like a central issue of the synod. Okay, I think that was my last. Wait, let me check. Yeah. Okay, so hopefully that was some new information for you. I didn't want to repeat what I've already said, and I can't. Hopefully, it was the fruit of a good conversation. So I think now I'm opening it for questions and answers. Questions, yes. Answers, maybe.
Kristen, thank you so much for your presentation. That was really helpful. Very, it kind of, I think it's going to temper our expectations a little bit in relation to what may happen. Maybe more on that later, but I do want to get to some of the folks raising their hands. First, Elachukwu Uzukwu is here.
Answered about there are some documents that were being cited, and I wanted to actually find out where I can access those documents. I think posted someone posted the link to the document. Please,
Great.
thank you so much. I'm sorry about it.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Now I am not a person who I don't use my cell phone tons. I don't do any social media. Now I don't not have a problem with it. I just don't. But I joined Instagram because the Synod's Instagram page is amazing. The Synod posts amazing things on Instagram. So like right now, I got my phone here. I don't know if you can see it good. Oh, you can't see it. The Synod has an amazing post today about the goal of a synodal church is relational conversion. So if you are a person who does social media, follow the synod.va on Instagram. And in my opinion, the Synod's website, the synod.va, just synod.va, really, I think their graphics are amazing. And I think they do a very good job of making things available and accessible and approachable. So I recommend taking a look at that. There's a really big desire at the Synod to reach out to young people, and they know that to do that, social media is a big way of doing that. Okay, thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Barbara, why don't you ask yours?
Kristen, you started to approach your last 5 minutes of your sharing, but my question is around the processes. And where I'm going with this is that does the Vatican have anything to encourage those processes to happen? Where I'm coming from is our diocese in particular will say, well, we're not going to do anything until we hear from the Vatican. Or they will say, we're not going to do anything or approve anything unless the whole Conference of American Bishops says we can do it. So if this whole next stage is about processes, how do we get people to opt into, participating in the processes?
Oh, it's such a good question. I mean, I am like obligated to say, because I've heard it at so many Vatican meetings, that what the Vatican wants is, they don't want dioceses to develop these listening sessions and these syntheses and then submit them to the USCCB or submit them to Rome and then wait for some marching orders to come back. Like, here's what we think you should do about what you heard. Okay. The Vatican is really, Pope Francis is very insistent that there's a lot that dioceses can do right now to respond to what the people of God said in this process. So in some ways, the idea that people, and again, not just your diocese and not just your parish, that people are waiting to hear what gets decided before they can act on something is kind of contrary to the whole mode of synodality. I think that there's really powerful things that people can do right now before this ends. So one question is usually when there's a synod like this, what happens is that in February, there is an apostolic exhortation that comes out where the Pope, because a synod, oh, this is such a fun way to celebrate my day. A synod in history, okay? If you went back to the ancient church, a synod was a decisive body that could make binding decisions, okay? The synods that we've had since Vatican II are not binding, they're only consultative, okay? So these synods, the Pope is consulting the synod provides them a report, and then the Pope writes an apostolic exhortation, which issues kind of the definitive decisions and teachings that come out of the process. So one of the questions is that this is such a different kind of a synod. Is Pope Francis going to issue something like that? Would the outcome of the synod look different? Is it going to be a different kind of a reality? So partially what I'm saying to you, Barb, is maybe nothing's coming, or it's going to look very different than how things have come in the past. So I do think, though, it's an interesting question about what is the role of the USCCB, and to what extent are dioceses waiting for the entire UCCB to make decisions before they can act? So this question about regional levels of authority, something important will get said about that in October, and I'll be eager to see what it is. But part of my answer, I guess, so it's a long answer to you, which is, in some ways, while some decisions about processes are pending, some action doesn't have to wait for that decision. So I don't know. I'll think more, and if I come up with anything great, I'll add it later. Okay.
All right. Yeah, I would like to thank Gretchen, who's kind of in our hand up line there, for reminding us that you can post your questions in the chat or raise your hand. There are a lot of things in the chat right now, so honestly, raising your hand is probably the quickest way to do this. And next in line is Mary Ellen.
Hi, Mary Ellen.
Yeah, I have very good presentation, really. Thank you very much for what you have shared.
You're welcome.
I just have a simple question. Who's attending this Synod next month? Is it the same people that were there a year ago?
Yep. It is the same people.
Oh, okay.
So it is, there's a very interesting list. So, some of the bishops were elected by their brother bishops. Some people were chosen by Pope Francis, and each continent got to choose to nominate 20 people. Half had to be women, and Pope Francis chose 10 of the 20. So no one is allowed to know who was on the list of 20. So your name might have been on the list, Mary Ellen, and you just don't know. And then Pope Francis chose the 10. So all of those people are returning. Of course, sometimes, there's been illnesses or whatever. Another exciting thing is that Father Timothy Radcliffe is continuing as the retreat director. I was talking to someone yesterday about the retreat. Last time the retreat was very interesting. All of the delegates came with their suitcases, and they had a place inside St. Peter's where they could leave their bag. And then they went out to St. Peter's for that big ecumenical prayer service. And then they went back into St. Peter's, got their bag, and from there got on a bus, and they went outside of Rome for the retreat, because they wanted the retreat to have some separation from the hustle and bustle of Rome, and also people slipping out to do just one meeting or get just one espresso. But this year, the retreat will be in Rome. They're not doing the same. They're still doing a retreat, which I think is great because it sets a prayerful tone for the synod. But it is outside. It's not outside of the city. It's in. One complaint that almost everybody who was at the synod had was that it was just exhausting. The pace of the work, they would work from like 7 a.m. to like 8 or 9 at night, with like a 2-hour break for lunch. There was actually quite a bit of discussion. Many people thought that the synod is going to be meeting from September 30th to October 7th. There was a lot of people that thought there was no way they were going to meet for 4 weeks again, because many people just thought it was too much. But they are. I'm looking at the chat myself, and I really like how Gretchen put in the chat the thing about the Pope Francis's interview with 60 Minutes. I don't know if you guys, if you're looking at that in the chat, but so if you're not familiar with that, one very, very, very big topic at the first session of the synod was the question of whether or not women could be deacons. And there was also, Pope Francis had established several study groups on this question, on the historical dimensions, like what is the historical evidence of women as deacons, and what is the theological ramifications. And actually an American woman named Phyllis Sagano, if you should get her to come to the Pittsburgh Priests. She's really the worldwide leader on this. And there was actually, women deacons got quite a bit of traction in the first session of the synod. Another group, if you're really interested in the synod, you should go look up the website Discerning Deacons. It is the most dynamic group of women in the United States that are just really committed to this issue of the ordination of women as deacons. They're very insistent that that's not like a stepping stone to ordination to the priesthood. That they really think that women have the gifts and vocation of being deacons. So there was a lot of excitement. I mean, I'm very, very close friends with many of the leadership team on that, and there was major buzz on this. And then Pope Francis, in this interview on 60 Minutes, was asked directly twice by Nora O'Donnell, if he thinks that women can be deacons, and Pope Francis said no. And that was really a cause for frustration for many people, if I'm being honest, because some people thought that why would Pope Francis be speaking definitively on this topic when he has established study groups on this? And it seemed like it was at least an open question at the synod. So I don't mention it to take any joy in raising this as a a problem. But I do want to just highlight that for many people who follow the synod, that was a major moment of question and difficulty and struggle, because it made some people have the impression that maybe what was being said on 60 Minutes didn't seem to be in sync with what was happening, and that disconnect was troubling for some people. So I applaud the question, Gretchen, because for a lot of synod watchers, that was really a big moment. And I have personally spoken to many theologians who found that moment really a moment of concern.
So just two quick things. One, I know for a fact that Casey Stanton has spoken to our group, and I'm sure you know her as one of the
Very well.
leadership of Discerning Deacons. I believe Phyllis Sagano as well, if I'm not mistaken. She's certainly very much know. Yes, Sister Barbara has confirmed that. So yes, we definitely have brought them in, and will probably continue to do so. I guess a follow-on question then is, so where do we go with this then? I mean, what are we to do with the fact that there's one groundswell of momentum happening and seeming to be taken seriously through the synodal process, and then it's totally refuted in a historic interview between Pope Francis and Nora O'Donnell in the public view, in a setting that is significantly more public and would get more press than anything that would come out of a synod. Let's face that.
Yeah.
Sorry for the tough question.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think if you talk to Casey Stanton right now, and she's a wonderful person, I don't think she's without hope. I think that she thinks that we have to, that discerning, we have to look at it causes us to look at our process of listening. So I think it's a great question. I think that we have, I'll just say this, and maybe this isn't the most theological, expert academic thing I've ever said. Every experience, let's put it this way. I have had such powerful, moving experiences of the Holy Spirit working in the church through the synodal process. Things have happened, like the questions I read earlier, that are so amazing to me. And I feel confident that even a handful of years ago, that wasn't the place our church was at. So I have absolute confidence that the Spirit is guiding the process of the synod. So I think that when there are hard moments and moments of pause and moments where things seem to be disconnected, that the overarching hope and the beautiful things that I've seen happen in the synod will carry. I just have trust that they will carry the day. But that means that people like Phyllis Agano and Casey Stanton have to avoid, hopefully, the desire to just leave and be so frustrated that they don't continue to do the great work that they've been doing. And I think they are continuing to do that great work. So I don't know. The reason why I actually called to mind or called to our attention the question is because I think it's a really good one. I think the synod is full of lots of different kinds of moments. So many moments of joy and so many moments of hope and so many moments of excitement. But there's also going to be moments of setback and frustration. And Timothy Radcliffe has, if you haven't read, okay, here's a gift I could give all of you. Okay. If you haven't read Timothy Radcliffe's book, the meditations he did on the synod, go out and buy that book immediately, because it is the most beautiful read and funny and smart. I don't get royalties for this, but they do sell it through Lit Press, which is at my school. But he has this funny line at the end of the book where he says that synodality, the word synodality implies motion, but it's actually a time when the church has stopped and looked at each other to ask for directions. So the synod can't just be all forward motion. It's a moment where we're asking each other really hard questions, and not every answer is perfect. But I mention it because I do think it was a moment for many people of question. Okay. I don't know. I think we have like a little few, maybe one or two more questions left.
Yeah, we have about 10 more minutes.
Okay,
Kristen,
great.
And then I'll ask you to sum up. Donna has been waiting patiently.
Great.
With her hand up. So
I hope she's getting what she's waited for.
We'll find out. Now, one of the things I was aware of is there was some pushback after the first synodal meeting from some of the parish priests who did not feel like they were adequately represented in the group. So I know that they met in April over in Rome and had their own session. Do you have any information as far as the result or the feedback from that? Because at least my experience here is we're not getting a lot of support at the parish level who either are not interested or feeling left out. Did anything positive come out of that April meeting?
This is such a great group. You guys I should be your historic third time invitee. I can only speak from my experience. So when I was part of that team that wrote the synthesis document after the first year, okay, where we took all of the documents, the 112 documents from the national Episcopal conferences, and we summarized them. One thing that we did was I might have mentioned this last time. We always had an empty chair in our room. And all the time we would ask ourselves, whose voices are not in these reports? Okay. Whose voice is not being heard? And to be honest, it was kind of surprising to us initially that, to be honest, priests are not really represented in the listening sessions. And when priests have been asked about this, I mean, some priests will say, well, this was supposed to be time, they interpreted it as time for the laity to speak, so like, this isn't the time my voice is supposed to be in, or COVID. It was just after COVID and priests were tired and people weren't coming back after televised mass and giving was down and they couldn't make their budgets and, they were being asked to do one more thing and they were tired, So there was also a sense of being demoralized because some priests felt that every time priests were mentioned in listening sessions, it was about clericalism. And it wasn't about like the good work that priests do. So that was the genesis of having that meeting. There was one other thing I was going to say about this. Can't remember what it was. I mean, so I think that, a lot of the details of that meeting have not been publicly released, but the sense that I got from watching what came out of the Vatican after that meeting was a sense that priests felt isolated and priests felt that they didn't know their bishop and priests felt that they needed more formation. That was what I wanted to say. So when the U.S. met the first time and the second time, okay, the local level and the interim phase, in my understanding, the U.S. was the only continent, or Canada and the U.S. were the only continent where the bishops met separately from the lay people, okay? In all the other continents, the listening sessions were mixed groups of lay people and bishops. Now, if you ask the organizers at the USCCB, they're going to tell you that bishops had indicated that they don't know each other. They want to know each other better, that they do have some kind of concerns that they'd like to talk to another bishop about, and that it was really like an effort to like support bishops by allowing them some spaces to grow in their relationships with each other and listen to each other and accompany each other. Okay. And I think that all of us can understand that there's some benefits, important benefits to that. But there's also important benefits to mixing the bishops as members of the people of God up with the other members of the people of God, you know? So one of the questions is like, when do we listen to priests by themselves? When do we listen to priests with other members of the people of God? When do we, like, how do we do these listening sessions so that people's needs are being met and we're also getting the voices that we need to hear and we're also representing baptismal dignity? So that's what I know.
Thank you, Kristen.
Yep.
Maybe one more. We have about 5 minutes left before we need to end the Q&A process. Kristen, I'm going to look at the chat, and if you want to look at it, it's at the 7:54 mark.
Okay.
A question about a disconnect between the synodal methodology being promoted at the highest level and the actual way most pastors operate. And how do we bridge that?
Hold on, I'm looking. There is a
7:54 in the
Yeah.
chat. There's a little more to it, but it's
Yeah,
basically
I see it. I mean, it's you guys aren't giving me softballs on my big milestone day. In my mind, the best authentic witness of how Christianity from the beginning has been spread is through joyful witnesses, joyful witnesses that show us that, Jesus Christ reveals us to ourselves and reveals our salvation. Like that, we are attentive listeners to the gospel, more attentive when it is we see the transformation that has happened in the life of a joyful witness. The synod is similar. I mean, who wants to go to one more meeting on Tuesday night where I'm awkwardly going to have to talk to somebody else and I'm going to have to like be uncomfortable because people are saying things that are hard about the church or they're not critical enough of the church as I want them to be. So I mean, one answer is that like a synodal transformation requires experience. When I got 5 minutes, okay, I got 5 minutes to address the whole synod leadership, okay, all the commissions I got. And I thought to myself, Kristen, what do you want to say? This is your 5 minutes, And one thing I said to them is that I teach college kids all the time. And I got 2 teenage daughters. And a lot of times people don't have patience for the messiness of communal discernment and the messiness of the church's decision making. They don't have patience if they don't have life-giving experiences in the church that help them endure the messiness. Okay? If you aren't having real experiences of God, of community, of self-understanding, of justice, like why would you endure the slowness and the messiness and the imperfection? Okay? So experience is incredibly important as a context for making this whole process seem reasonable and meaningful and like we should be doing it. So one answer is like, how can we get people to have these experiences? We all know that sometimes the best way to get, like when I want someone to be a theology major, or we think about someone who could maybe be a priest or maybe be a leader in a certain group, the power of invitation is amazing. So like, do we say to these priests, like, hey, the synod's going on, and could we try a few synodal methodologies in the parish? And maybe I'll, if I worked up a handout on this, like, would you let me run a session in a synodal way? So like giving people experiences, inviting, offering, doing the work, being the spark. I think that's like really, really important. And then, I mean, this is like a good way of ending. Like, we also have to just pray to the Holy Spirit to transform our church. Pray for a synodal transformation of the church so that it can live as its most authentic self. And sometimes that transformation is slow. Okay. As Jim mentioned in my introduction, I'm on the official dialogue between the Anglican Communion and the Roman Catholic Church. And I mean, an ecumenical dialogue is slow going. All right. But I trust that it's going to bring about real change. But I don't know when that change is going to be. I don't know if I'll see it, but it's slow. But then one of my heroes, Cardinal Walter Casper, pause for gushing, he said that, when he lived in Germany, that people walking by the Berlin Wall 2 days before that wall came down would have thought that their great-grandchildren and their great-great-grandchildren would have that division. And then 2 days later, it was gone. So like sometimes change happens slow and sometimes change happens fast. And we have to like do the work of making both of those things possible. And part of that is prayer, and part of that is experience, and part of that is invitation, and part of that is being a witness. So those are a few ideas.
Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, I'm going to ask you in a few seconds to make your last 1-minute statement. So before we do that, thank you for pointing out, how this is all, the church is human, the church is divine. That God seems to like to mix it up with us in all kinds of ways, and this process is certainly one of them. So maybe one of the things we need is some patience with the humanity of it all, and another thing we need is to open ourselves and help people around us open ourselves together to the Spirit in whatever way we can. So closing words, Kristen.
Closing words. Thank you, 88 people who have stayed with us this whole time. Thank you, Pittsburgh priests, for being 11. I mean, the Synod is just an idea. It's not a thing unless we live it into reality. Okay? And like, if we want to be a synodal church, we can't sit around and wait around for somebody else to do that. We have to do that. And you and your group are doing that. And it's amazing. I just want everybody to be excited and hopeful that awesome things are happening in the Catholic Church, like previously unimaginable, amazing things that we are blessed to be able to live through. They're not perfect, and it's not like October is going to solve, every concern. But I think that all of us are here because we have experience that this church is life-giving, and that it's an agent of change and transformation. And it does illumine for people the living presence of the living God. So if I give you a parting word, it's thanks, and be excited and be hopeful. Pray for the Synod.
Thank you, Kristen. To encourage people who might want to do something locally, I have put into the chat a link to the APP resources page, where you can find a series of bulletin inserts that we did on synodality. The first two were kind of time bound. Numbers 3 and 4, though, are on conversation in the Spirit and what is a synodal meeting, and kind of how do you do one in your own place. If you belong to a parish group or something, you can do a synodal meeting to plan, to look ahead at what you might want to do next, to discern that together. So thank you again, Kristen. And